everybody! So today we're going to be taking a further look into the Chinese Exclusion Act. We're going to start way back with the Opium Wars, then go through the California Gold Rush, the court case People v. Hall, the Exclusion Act itself, and the subsequent exclusionary acts, and we'll finish with the Magnuson Act. The information about the Opium Wars that I have is from the website Britannica. I don't have access to a history textbook right now, so that's what I'm working with. The first Opium War was initiated in 1839 between Britain and China. Britain had been illegally trading opium from India to China. Opium addiction had become a major issue for the Chinese population, impacting the economy as well as society itself. Attempts to stop the opium trading from happening, and then responses to that, things amplified and eventually went all the way to armed conflict. Britain won the war, and the resulting Treaty of Nanjing or Nanking, I've seen it written both ways, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. I'm not sure which one is the preferred way to say it. When that treaty was signed on August 29, 1842, Britain ended up getting Hong Kong and 4 new ports to use, in addition to the one they already secured. A supplementary treaty signed in October of 1843. Okay, so when I talk about this supplementary treaty, I'm gonna be looking at my notes because I have a quote written directly, and it's just gonna work better for everyone if I just read directly off of it. Okay. So the supplementary treaty was signed on October 8th, 1843, and it granted British citizens extraterritoriality, which is the right to be tried by British courts, and most favored nation status. Britain was granted any rights in China that might be granted to other foreign countries. Other Western countries quickly demanded and were given similar privileges. And so when it comes to extraterritoriality, essentially if British citizens committed a crime in China, they would be able to be tried by British courts and not Chinese courts, even though China is the place that endured the harm that individual caused. And with most favored nation status, it just kind of opened up the floodgates for people to take advantage of China's position. Honestly speaking, it seems like the Second Opium War is an extension of that advantage taking. It began in 1856 with France now joining Britain's side. China was occupied with a rebellion, so I think it's fair to say that France and Britain kind of struck while the iron was hot. After 4 years of armed conflict, treaties were proposed, and then everyone journeyed to China to sign them. China explicitly told Britain, do not go through Daegu, and yet Britain went through Daegu, and the result was a lot of British casualties. Instead of just going the desired path the second time, Britain brought along France, and they pushed through Daegu in order to overpower China. After they did this, the proposed treaties ended up being signed. The Tianjin Treaties, again, pronunciation, I'm sorry. And this is a quote straight from Britannica, so I'm going to read straight from the screen so I don't get anything wrong. The treaties provided residence in Beijing for foreign envoys, the opening of several new ports to Western trade and residence, the right of foreign travel in the interior of China, and freedom of movement for Christian missionaries. In further negotiations in Shanghai later in that year, the importation of opium was legalized. And that's the end of the quote. In addition to the treaty's terms, Britain also got the Kowloon Peninsula, which is across from Hong Kong. So at this point in time, Britain has both Hong Kong and the Kowloon Peninsula. The sets of treaties that resulted from the Opium Wars were extremely unequal, and China ended up with the short end of the stick. Actually, more accurately, Britain gave them the short end of the stick. As a result of the economic impacts of the Opium Wars, the California Gold Rush was very enticing for a lot of folks, not just people from China, but around 300,000 people came to the Sutter's Mill area when gold was found there in 1848. The information that I have on the gold rush is in part from Britannica, but the majority of it is from the Journal of Economic History from Cambridge University Press. So in 1848, gold was found in Sutter's Mill, California. And like I said already, about 300,000 people came to the area. This is a quote from Britannica. Before the discovery of gold, the territory's population was approximately 160,000, and the vast majority of whom were Native Americans. Almost 2 times the amount of their current population arrives to the area. People found out there was gold there and said, we need to prioritize this area so that the young nation can be healthy and wealthy. And it didn't matter who they hurt. The gold rush is seen as the main event that brought California to statehood. When news of gold came around, a significant amount of Chinese immigrants came to the region. When white men saw the influx meant more competition for success in gold mining, they advocated for exclusionary efforts. They were already competing with each other, and they wanted as much profit as possible. The following quote is from the Online Archive of California. In 1850, the first California state legislature passed the first foreign miners tax law, levying $20 per month tax on each foreigner engaged in mining. A revolt resulted, and it was repealed in 1851. The foreign miners tax law was reenacted in 1852. By 1853, the foreign miners tax stated in Section 6, the amount to be paid for each license shall be at the rate of $4 per month, and said license shall in no case be transferable. There were brief attempts to increase this rate even further, but it ended up remaining at about $4 a month. According to the CPI inflation calculator that you can find online, $4 in 1850 has the same purchasing power as around $133 today. After years of back and forth, while the state was still working to maintain financial stability, many of the counties decided that the benefits of excluding Chinese people outweighed those of including them. The California state legislature, quote, passed a law prohibiting Chinese immigration and calling for fines and possible imprisonment for anyone found guilty of transporting Chinese workers into the state, end quote, in 1858. Now, I know that wasn't a very in-depth discussion about the gold rush, but there's a lot that happened in it, and I just was kind of glazing over it to just address the points relevant to the Chinese Exclusion Act in this chronology that I'm setting up. If that makes sense? Okay, cool. The court case People v. Hall was very significant in the dehumanization of Chinese people, adding to the circumstances against Chinese immigrants, which is previously exampled through the foreign miners tax. In this court case, Ling Sing, one of many Chinese men who were frequently attacked at mining camps, was killed by George Hall, a white man. Initially, Hall was found guilty and sentenced to death, but the defense wanted a retrial, and they asked for this on the basis that the testimony of 3 of the witnesses were inadmissible because they were Chinese. The defense argued that only white men can testify against other white men in a court of law and have it be admissible. This adheres to an extremely destructive racist idea of racial castes. As a result, George Hall was not retried because, in addition to losing those 3 witnesses, one of the white witnesses had died, leaving the prosecution with very little admissible evidence. Hall was released, and no one faced consequences for Ling Sing's killing. This set the precedent that Chinese people could not testify in court. The reason why I wanted to include this is it's just another stepping stone in the dehumanization of a group of people. And that dehumanization, in addition to anti-Chinese propaganda, toppled over into the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. The following information is from the Library of Congress's website. The Chinese Exclusion Act, which was signed on May 6, 1882, prohibited immigration from China for the next 10 years. The act didn't apply to those who were in the U.S. by November 17, 1880, or to those who would be there within 90 days of the act's passage, with evidence of their right to come to the U.S. dated November 17, 1880. Regardless of how long anyone had been there, citizenship was not a possibility for Chinese folks. 10 years later, the Geary Act extended the restrictions for another 10 years and amplified the potential for mistreatment and racial profiling. This info I got from government archives that I found online, and as always, everything's linked in the link tree for that, like sources, links one. You'll know it when you see it. The Geary Act made Chinese folks, quote, register and secure a certificate as proof of their right to be in the United States. Imprisonment or deportation were the penalties for those who failed to have the required papers or witnesses, end quote. They had to have them with them at all times, these papers. And the witnesses they mention, remember from People v. Hall, Chinese folks can't testify. You can't be a witness. If you didn't have your papers, you'd have to have a white witness in order to prove that you had a right to be in the United States. When the next 10 years came to an end in 1902, the restrictions against Chinese immigrants became indefinite. And that held up until 1943, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Magnuson Act, which repealed all of the exclusion acts previously signed. I got my info for this from the American Presidency Project, and the following is FDR's statement from when he signed the bill. Quote, it is with particular pride and pleasure that I have today signed the bill repealing the Chinese exclusion laws. The Chinese people, I am sure, will take pleasure in knowing that this represents a manifestation on the part of the American people of their affection and regard. An unfortunate barrier between allies has been removed. The war effort in the Far East can now be carried on with a greater vigor and a larger understanding of our common purpose, end quote. While I would like to say FDR did this because he realized the racism and xenophobia involved in the Exclusion Acts, the timing of the signature makes it clear that this was a political move to obtain an ally in China. And I'm not saying FDR had no good intentions at all. I'm just saying there's reason to be skeptical of his motives for signing. As with everything that's happened in the past, this series of events still has impact today. And I'd need to talk about them for a lot longer in order to cover every toll that this has taken. So I'm stopping with the Magnuson Act today. That does not mean that after FDR signed it, everything was so great for everyone trying to immigrate from China. Well, alrighty folks, that's it for this week. And the links to everything, as always, are in the link tree, which you can find in the description below. And hang in there. You've got this, and I will see you later.